Well, what happens in some cases is that the generic companies, in order to come to market, they need to do certain studies to compare their generic drugs to the branded drug, basically to prove they're the same. And they need anywhere between 1,500 to 5,000 doses of the branded company's drug in order to do those studies. They go out into the market and they try to buy those doses, but we know that some brand companies adopt tactics to basically prevent that sale, to frustrate the ability of the generic companies to access the drugs. Sometimes they'll put in place certain restrictions in the agreements that they strike with pharmacies or PBMs, other intermediaries, where they basically say you can't sell the drugs to the generic companies, or they make it hard for that sale to take place. And we think that's anti-competitive, and it frustrates a fundamental obligation we have, which is to do these studies as a step before we approve generic drugs to consumers.
Is there ever a legitimate reason for companies banning big sales of a drug?
Well, the branded companies sometimes say that the restrictions that we put on the use of drugs in the marketplace to ensure they're used safely, certain drugs that have some, very unusual, extraordinary risks associated with them, like the risk of causing birth defects, we'll put in place what's called a REMS, a risk mitigation plan, in the market to restrict how the drug is used by physicians, or put in place certain requirements, like people have to undergo certain testing. And the branded companies will say that, well, since we've put these conditions on the use of the drug, they can't just sell the drug to anyone. They have to make sure that whoever they sell the drug to is going to adhere to those restrictions. And so we'll, in those cases, offer a letter to the generic company saying, yes, we've reviewed your protocol, and we think that your protocol is going to assure that you adhere to all of the FDA restrictions that we put on the drug. And then they'll bring that letter back to the branded company and say, see, the FDA thinks our study's fine, sell us the drug.
So you're not even talking about legal ways that they do it, where they do an extended release and then they advertise, spend millions of dollars saying, no, you got to have blah, blah, blah XL instead of the generic. You're not even talking about that. They're going to keep doing that. You're just talking about actually, huh?
We don't see that as much anymore. I mean, that's a little different, where branded companies would basically create a new formulation of their branded drugs, switch physicians over to that drug and pull the old one.
12 years or 17 or whatever it is, yeah.
So, Scott, the idea of doing this is something Congress has talked about, trying to change and force these companies to do it. How come that didn't work?
Well, Congress has legislation that would create some hammers on the branded companies if they're thought to be preventing these kinds of sales. We think there's things we can do administratively, steps we can take as a regulatory agency to also address this. But Congress's legislation seeks to do some different things.
We're looking right now at a list of the companies: Celgene, GlaxoSmithKline, Pfizer, Valeant, BioMarin, Gilead, Novartis. These are the companies that you say are doing this the most?
Well, what we did was we put out on a public website, to create transparency, the requests that we get from generic companies asking us why they can't get access to the doses that they need, and whether or not there's a restriction in place that we've put in place that's preventing that. And so we get those requests. We've gotten about 150 in all. And we provided transparency around which drugs we're getting requests around. And we also provided the instances in which we're asked to affirmatively send a letter on behalf of the generic company back to the branded company saying, hey, it's okay, you can sell the drug to this generic company. They're going to maintain good custody of the drug and not violate the regulations that we've put in place on the safe use of that product.
Have you heard back from any of these companies that have been named? And I guess this is the process thought to be shamed to changing practices.
Well, look, this isn't meant to objectify people. This is meant to provide transparency around a phenomenon that's taking place in the market that I think is frustrating, a fundamental obligation that we have to balance access with innovation. We have heard back from some of them. I haven't personally. I know some of my folks have. I don't know which ones.
And I guess just in terms of what happens next with this? I mean, your hope is that this will just open things up, that companies will stop doing this, and you can more quickly get more of these tests going through?
Well, we're going to keep this updated, I think. So, I know we're going to keep it updated. So I think that this hopefully provides another reason why companies that might be taking steps, proactive, affirmative steps to restrict these sales, think that this isn't, necessarily in the best interest of the overall marketplace. I mean, we have a system that pays market-based returns on innovation. I think that's the system we need to have to reward the capital it takes to develop a new drug. But it also, there's an expectation that you'll have vigorous generic competition once the intellectual property has lapsed. And that's where I think we have to work harder, because we are seeing these monopolies get extended beyond what Congress intended, and sometimes in perpetuity.
I'd read recently that some of these proposals like this to try and ensure generic drug access would end up saving the government about $3.8 billion over 10 years. I guess that's in the amount that it would save from Medicare and Medicaid spending money on these drugs?
That's right. The savings that are scored by the Congressional Budget Office are accrued to government programs, and that's the savings that's ascribed to the bill you talked about at the outset, the legislation that's before Congress.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.